Welcome to another episode of Mastery Talks. Today we're hosting Carole Robin.
Carole is an esteemed expert in leadership and interpersonal dynamics, widely celebrated for her transformative teaching at Stanford GSB for legendary interpersonal dynamics course, which students also called touchy-feely.
And Carole is a touchy-feely queen. Beyond her academic contributions, Carole is a co-founder of Leaders in Tech, where she continues to shape the leaders of tomorrow.
Her acclaimed book, Connect, co-authored with David Bradford, offers profound insights into building exceptional relationships, both personally and professionally.
Carole's work has been pivotal in fostering environments where people truly connect, collaborate, and thrive. And we're thrilled to dive into a conversation on how we build strong connections in leadership and how this relationship can drive success and fulfillment in the workplace. So, Carole, it's really great to have you with us today. Your legendary involvement in touchy-feely, your contribution and your ideas that you bring up with Leaders in Tech, and your impressive book, Connect, that you wrote together with David Bradford. In my view, you made, with all the other luminaries of the soft skills movement, a significant contribution to the industry and to the humanization of the workplace.
Thank you.
In your decades of working and coaching with leaders, you've emphasized how people do business with people, not with money, not with machines and strategies. Can you talk about why building strong connections is so critical, especially from leadership perspective?
In summary, you stated the most important aspect of that, which is that people forget that in the end, people do business with people. So if you don't have any skills in building relationships, that is limiting no matter how fabulous your product is and how well placed it is and how good your product market fit is. And it's also important because leaders have a lot of different sources of power. And I'm using power and influence interchangeably, even though for a lot of people, power, is a dirty word. And it's like power in service of what? If it's power in service of good, then there's nothing wrong with power. And in fact, the more power you have, if you use that to influence people to follow you towards something that you want to make happen, that's something leaders should aspire to have. So there are a lot of different sources of power that leaders have. And like your vision is a source of power. And does that inspire people? Your ability to create work that people feel is meaningful. I'm doing something that uses my skills. That's a source of power. There's a particular source of power that a lot of people don't realize, and it's actually, there's research that backs this up. It's called referent power. And it's the kind of power that you have when other people look at you and say, I want to be more like that. I want to, when I grow up, I want to learn how to, show up in the world that way. So referent figure is somebody who's a role model. So referent power is a identified real source of power for leaders. It also turns out that the research shows that of all the sources of personal power, by personal power, I mean things like, what are the rewards that you give people? What are the punishments that you levy when people don't do what you want? What are, there are many sources of personal power, but the only two that are correlated, where you are in the hierarchy is a source of power, right? If you're above everybody else. But the only two that are correlated when used predominantly to high-performing organizations is expertise and referent power. So the power you get from knowing what you're talking about, obviously expertise, but referent power. And a lot of people don't understand how to be a referent figure, how to gain referent power, how they need to interact with others in order for others to see them as a referent figure. So that's a lot of what I've dedicated my entire career to.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I don't think, many leaders realize these two sources of power, because I know like it's important to like build trust, and like expertise is also part of trust, building trust. Very rarely outside of your work have I ever heard of importance of being a referent figure at the
Yeah,
workplace. Thank
yeah,
you so much for sharing that.
absolutely. Yeah.
And we were like getting ready for this podcast. You see, like, this whole book like is filled with
I
notes.
love all the
And
little tabs.
yeah, so my next question is: your work has introduced the concept of exceptional relationship, but what makes a relationship exceptional versus ordinary, and why should this matter to leaders?
I'm glad you asked me that because it's easy to interpret uh, my work, David's and my work, as advocating for turning all relationships into exceptional. Like that's the goal. And that is not what we're saying. So relationships exist on a continuum. At one end of the continuum is dysfunction and toxic, and actually maybe we could even say contact and no connection. At the other end of the continuum is something we came to call exceptional. But we identified what are the skills and competencies you need in order to move along that continuum. The goal for leaders, I think, should be to at least know how to bring all of their relationships to robust and functional. You don't have to get all the way to exceptional. That's impractical. It takes too much time and it's not necessary. But it turns out that once you've learned those skills and you've learned how to move down the continuum, then you can, on a very individualized basis, decide, well, who do I want to go even further with? And in fact, in the book, we make this analogy of climbing a mountain and how there's an upper meadow, which we might consider the robust functional relationship, and how, learning how to climb helps you get to there. And then there's a summit, which is, harder. It takes more time. And sometimes the meadow is really nice. There's beautiful flowers. It's springtime. You already climbed all the way there. There's no need, right? Um, and and so I think it's a trap to think that you have to get all of your relationships to exceptional, or even more than a handful. Uh, I think when if people have really exceptional relationships, they're lucky if they get to a handful.
Carol, thank you for this striking example. I think that even though not all the relationships have to be exceptional, still, if we are moving through this continuum, we're moving in the same direction, right? Can you talk about how do we develop this relationship from no contact to exceptional?
Yeah.
And what skills do we use?
Yeah, great question. In other words, how do we even move? How do we make any movement
Right.
toward the direction along the continuum? So we identified as six characteristics of relationships as they start to move. Well, six characteristics of relationships when they are really fully in place and as deeply in place as one can get, then it's exceptional. But some version of those six characteristics is what gets you at least to robust. And those characteristics are: I am better known by you. Doesn't mean you know everything about me, but I feel known by you. And you feel known by me. And we trust each other, and we trust that the disclosures we make and the things we tell each other, we won't use against each other. Those are the first three, and they all have to do with a set of skills that were core to the courses that we taught and core to the book, which is how to both engage in disclosure so that you don't freak yourself or the other person out, but also how to invite someone else to disclose. Um, so we build that very slowly. The other three characteristics have to do with we are honest with each other, and we learn how to deal with conflict productively. It doesn't mean we have no conflict. It just means we know how to do it in a way that's productive and that actually helps deepen the relationship. And we're invested in each other's growth. And so when you have all six of those, to some extent, you've at least gotten off this end and you've moved. And the more you have each of those and the more established and more deeply you have invested in each of those, the farther along you have moved. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And also, I wanted just to add to my question, what are some common misconceptions in terms of, just the choice of development?
Well, for starters, um, most people, all people have mental models, beliefs and assumptions that they have developed, especially once we're adults, um, that of how things work, what makes us effective, what makes a leader strong and powerful, why people follow other people, how I need to show up in order for you to find me credible, right? We have these are beliefs and assumptions. And we don't make them up out of just thin air. We take all the experiences in our life and we develop these mental models based on those. Oh, this worked. I'm going to do more of that. Oh, this didn't work. I'm going to do less of that. One of the I, I use the word tragedy, and it may be an overstatement, but for me in my world, one of the tragedies in business is a mental model that people develop very early in their careers that you cannot be real, that you cannot tell people what's really going on for you, that God forbid, you should use any emotions. You leave those in the parking lot. And and those are mental models that do serve us very early. When we're young and just starting out, of course, you're not going to start out by telling everybody everything and bursting out crying when you're upset and saying that you're really, disappointed in what your boss did. Of course. But the problem is we get set in those mental models and we don't ever find a way to test whether they're still serving us. And then not only do they stop serving us, they start hurting us. And so, I often tell this story about being the first woman hired in a very technical company, very large company, and the first woman hired in a non clerical job. There were lots of secretaries, and boy, I learned these lessons really, really well. And I was 21 years old, fresh out of college. Well, 10 years later, I was by then gotten promoted a lot of time. I was running a big business. I was at an offsite with my people, and I got kind of worked up. And one of my guys looked at me and said, "Carole, is that like water in the corner of your eye? Are you going to cry?" And I said, and then he said, "Are you human after all? Are you human?" And I've told this story many times, but I tell it because it's such a great example of a mental model that served me really well until it really didn't. It got to the point, I'd gotten to the point where my people didn't see me as human. So, and then of course I burst out crying. And then I realized, oh my God, it's time to update my mental model and update it. A lot of what we talk about in the book, a lot of what we do in the course is help people think about how might I update my mental models? How might I update my mental models about disclosure? Never tell anybody anything about me. Somewhere between there and let me just tell you everything and overwhelm you and overwhelm myself. There's a lot of gray, right? Don't give feedback that ruins relationships. Somewhere between saying nothing and just having somebody continue to do stuff that is bad for the relationship or for you or for your company or for your team and making them feel terrible, there's a lot of gray. So that's why it's a core concept is find a way to at least test the utility of your mental models. And that's what people get to do in Leaders in Tech. That's what's so transformational. That's what's transformational in the course at Stanford. Yeah.
I thought, Carol, that's what I love about doing this podcast, because recently we host the discussion with Alison Kluger, who is a reputation management professor, and she says, never cry at work, especially if you're a woman, never cry at work. From the perspective of reputation management, from the perspective of relationship building, right? You have to cry. So leadership challenges, balancing through all this.
Yeah, and what a wonderful point, Yana, because if I had burst out crying 2 months after I was hired, I would have never become a regional manager of a $50 million business, which, by the way, in those days was a lot of money. Today, it's like nothing. But so there's time and place and context matter. And by the way, as an academic, I never say never, and I never say always. And I think it's a both and. It's if you don't ever allow for the possibility that something that a behavior you have engaged in has really served you, but may no longer be serving you, you are, you got to get luckier to succeed.
I'm reminded of your point that soft skills require a lot of hard work. And I wanted to ask, like, following up with what you shared, what have you observed of like impact of leaders' ability to connect on their team's performance and effectiveness, right? Because it's not like in the end, business still requires us to show better performance, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So before I dive into that, one of my favorite moments in my career was when I did a workshop like this for a bunch of NASA engineers, actually NASA upper management. And I said, "Come on, you guys." They were all guys. "You guys, it's not rocket science." And they said, "Oh gosh, Carol, this is so
It
much
is.
harder than rocket science." So yeah, it's not to be harder.
Yeah. I mean, I love this.
So, to your point, first, if I as a leader do not believe that relationships matter and do not behave in ways that foster stronger relationships, why should anybody on my team do that? That's what it means to be a referent figure. So very, very few people are not interdependent in a work situation, in any work, whether it's a business, a nonprofit, in any situation that's an organizational, situation. And so the minute you have interdependence, relationships are going to matter. And to the extent that you as a leader have shown the way, have helped them both see what it looks like, but also believe that you're not just blowing smoke, and you've invested in helping them learn how to be better at developing stronger relationships. And the other thing that we know is teams, people who learn together create their own kind of community as a result of being learners together. Think of what happens at LEAD and in Touchy Feely at GSB, right? You suddenly have a common language. You have a new additional perspective on how to look at situations, because you now understand better how some of your colleagues view the very same situation. And you learn how to be curious instead of judgmental. In fact, there's a lot of research that supports the teams where there is more inquiry than advocacy. when they get together are more productive and are higher performing. Because if all we're doing is I'm only trying to talk you into something, you're only trying to talk Yana into something, Yana's only trying to talk you into something, that's not as productive as, gee, Juliana, help me understand how you arrived at that conclusion as the best way for us to go. First of all, when I demonstrate curiosity, I also demonstrate that I might value you. And, that sounds so simple. Again, it's not rocket science, but wow, most people don't do it.
Yeah. And I want to add, sorry for my comments. It just looks like I'm looking for contradictions, but I'm not.
No, 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 I love it. Please.
I recalled Ray Dalio, who endorsed your book, that if you've heard about his concept of
Yes,
thoughtful disagreement at
yes,
work, and
yes,
he says, I don't want to see, calm, still workplace. I want to come and see people who are fighting for what they believe in.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And, there's a reason he endorsed my book, right? Our book. So it's a both and. It's not an either or. I can be passionate about what I believe. And I'm not saying don't ever advocate. I'm just saying, to the extent that you don't also allow for the possibility that there might be something else to consider, A, you're going to make worse decisions. And B, you're going to distance people. They're going to be like, I'm not even going to tell Carole because she's not even open to anything other than what she's decided is right. Well, I don't know a whole lot of people that succeed under those circumstances.
Most of us, I think, want to have exceptional relationship at work, at least some of them. But in reality, we rarely get to the robust ones and even functional. And I think that this widespread lack of connection at the workplace really made our interactions more transactional at the workplace, which leads to highly disengaged workforce in terms of vision and and being dedicated to the
And
company.
collaboration.
Right. So what are your thoughts on how to build robust and functional relationship at work at the beginning?
I'm loving your questions, by the way. So, so you're right or I agree with you that one of the things that happened, especially during the pandemic, when everybody went to Hollywood Squares, which is an old show. I don't know if you know it. I'm actually dating myself because your generation probably doesn't even know what I'm talking about. But they had a bunch of actors on squares, and they asked them questions. It was a game show. Anyway, before that became for a time the only modality in which teams got together. Task became more and more foregrounded, and relationship became more and more backgrounded. Because who wants to spend any more time than you absolutely have to on a Zoom call? Um, so, and then even once people got together again, that it was like a new norm. Like let's just get to business. Let's just get to work, and and it was even before, right? But it got way worse during the pandemic. So, again, task, of course, task matters. And to the extent that you never pay attention to the relationship, eventually it's going to come back to bite you. So to the extent that as a leader, you think about, I better build in some actual, whether it's structures or practices that encourage people's connections with each other, relationships. It's not going to just happen because everybody's busy. Everybody's got a lot to do. So I'll give you some examples. One of our leaders in tech, actually quite a few of our leaders in tech, CEOs, but the one I'm thinking about in particular, had during the pandemic was hiring a lot of his C-suite because we do work with startup founders, and he only had a few, and he was rounding out his C-suite. So he hired these people he'd never met in person. They were all working, on online. They were all over the country. And one of the things that he did from the start, to your point, is he instituted something he'd learned at Leaders in Tech, which was they started every meeting before they got into the agenda. Each one of them spent 90 seconds, which they timed, saying, "If you really knew me," and then completing that sentence. If you really knew me right now, you would know that I'm thrilled to be on this podcast with you. If you really knew me right now, you would know that I wish you had many millions of followers because I am desperate in trying to learn how to get all of this out into the world more. If you really knew me, you would know that I just found out that we've just crossed the 120,000 books sold mark. And
Oh,
uh,
congratulations.
and if you
What's
really
up
knew
with
me,
you,
and if you
brother?
really knew me, you'd know that I feel mixed about saying that because it sounds so like self-serving, and I don't want to be like, there's a great word in Spanish, presumida, but it- I'm also super proud and super happy. So I didn't time that. It might have been more than 2 minutes, but I bet that everybody just got to know me a whole lot better. Oh, can I just
Yeah.
add one thing to this example of the CEO who did this?
Yeah.
A year after he had hired all these people who had still never all met, one of them, in their one-on-one, said, "I have never been part of a team where I felt more connected to my fellow C-suite members." And by the way, they had never met in person. And they didn't spend their entire weekly staff meeting on it. They spent 90 seconds apiece.
It's such a great achievement. I mean, like working with remote teams and knowing how difficult it is for them to feel connected, and knowing how companies throw money on the problem and just like bringing them together, like, 4 times per year, like disrupting the work process.
Totally. And
It's
he had bought them all a book, and he had a vocabulary of feelings laminated and sent to each of them so they had it in front of them. I mean, he was all in. So
I
just
met
like you're
leaders and that
asking
helped him
something
a
about,
lot.
yeah,
Yeah. So I wanted to touch down on the because we also want to cover all of the important concepts from the book for our listeners. And you discuss the concept of pinches and crunches, which I personally really love because for me, sharing feedback and not going to crunches was always a huge
yeah,
a huge challenge.
yeah.
Can you explain what those are and how leaders can address them to
Sure,
build stronger,
sure. And
stronger?
let me start by saying you are not alone. The fact that, I mean, most people err on the side of not surfacing pinches, which is why they become crunches. um, and uh, and it goes back to mental models why they don't. Oh, if I say this, then you're gonna take offense, or you're gonna think I'm mean, or you're gonna come back and tell me I'm doing something wrong. It's gonna escalate. I'm not doing that, right? So those are some of the reasons why we don't even surface a pinch, much less give somebody feedback. Pinches are those little annoying things that people do. They occur in every relationship. They're usually minor because that's why they're called pinches. And our tendency is to say, I'm not going to make a big deal out of it, because of all the reasons I just said. Now, I am not saying you should raise every single pinch you ever feel with every person. Again, if my co-founder does something that kind of bugs, I'll give you a great example. One of my co-founders is always late. Always, guaranteed. Although once in a while he surprises me, is on time, but is always late. But And so that's a pinch because I am really like a nut about being on time, and it's a big value of mine because it feels like respectful to be on time. So it's a pinch, but it's not. It's never gotten bigger. It's like, oh, there he is again. being late again. It's easy for me to let it go because it's not growing. So I have to have a little self-awareness in order to know when to raise a pinch and whether to raise a pinch, which is why we talk about these two antennae in the book, one of which is check in with yourself. What's going on for you? What in this case, yeah, it's not a big deal. It's just, him being him. So, however, if it was something that every time he showed up late, I got a little more annoyed, then it would be my responsibility, if I care about the relationship, to tell him before it becomes a crunch where I'm furious. He shows up one day and now I'm furious, and I've never even given him any heads up that this was a problem, right? So most people say, it's not worth it. And one of the things that, have said until I'm blue in the face is take that pronoun it and replace it with I'm not worth it. You're not worth it. We're not worth it. And then ask yourself again whether it's worth raising.
Actually, yesterday, Yana asked me, what's the one thing that you've taken from Carol's book, like that you keep using? And I told her exactly that, like this lens change. Like I constantly in my head, I substitute like, it's not worth it to I'm not worth it, or like we are not worth it. And
Yep,
it completely changes perspective.
exactly.
Oh, like, that's the thing. Like I use this, I mean, like every week, almost every day.
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled for you, and I'm thrilled for all the people you are in relationship with.
My husband and I also practice in Connect. We call it Practice Connect. And yeah, it's really playbook how to build relationship. Really,
It's
I
intended to
can't
be.
say more or less about this book. It's just practical guide. And yeah, my best recommendations to all the people who build any relationship in life to read and to take this guide, till the end of your life, because
Thank you, Yana.
it's a soft skills classic.
Yeah, well, and one of the challenges is that relationships take work. It's not three easy steps. It's not the same thing works for every person. It you know it's and in originally our publisher wanted three easy steps, and we said that's not how it works. That'll work for 10% of the people who read the book. And it was a disservice to the course and to all the content that we had developed. So, but I'm so happy to hear you point out that when you read it with somebody else and you do those deepen your learning sections at the end of each chapter together, that's like going through the class. That's why we said the book is like one the course taught one chapter at a time. And it's not something you're going to pick up at the airport in New York, read it on the plane, put it in your bookshelf, and now suddenly all your relationships are transformed.
This book is created to be gifted, honestly.
I have a couple of friends who now give it to every bridal shower,
That's very smart.
regardless of what else they're giving the
I'm
bride.
taking this.
They give the bride, the book. And some of the guys, they don't get invited to the bridal showers. They are gifting it to the couple as a wedding gift.
Yeah. So I'm curious why they give to the bride only.
Well, I was talking about at wedding showers. Wedding showers are usually
Okay.
with
Right. Right.
women, which
Okay.
is why I said, and I also have a lot of men who I know
Right.
who they don't get invited to bridal showers, but they give it to the couple as a wedding gift.
Yeah. That's amazing. That I would do the same because I found out that from the feminine perspective, this knowledge that you create is more intuitive, and we feel that way. And thanks to your book, we now can or able to act that way. But in terms of man, the discovery happens from the first page of the book. Like, oh, really? I would that disclose myself? No way.
Yeah. Well, we're back to mental models. Now, men, from the time they were little boys, have been told, do not, they fall down, they scrape their knee in the playground. You're okay. You're okay. God forbid they should like say, I'm hurt, right? From the time that they can even comprehend language, they're socialized to suppress feelings, all feelings except anger. Anger somehow is okay as long as it's expressed appropriately. But anger is a distancing emotion. And there are many, many other emotions that are connecting emotions. In fact, almost all the others. And anger is a secondary emotion, usually to fear or to hurt. But because so many men have been socialized with don't be vulnerable, don't show your feelings, the only feeling at their disposal is anger.
So interesting. So it turns out that we think that anger usually, people perceive it as something close to power, right? If I can do this, if I can yell at you or
Yeah.
behave that way, it means that I feel that I'm maybe better or higher, right?
Yes.
And
Maybe,
how
maybe being the operative term.
how funny it is that it's not at all about strengths, but it's about your weaknesses.
If I might, I want to give you a real quick example of what we were just talking about with regard to disclosure of anger and feelings from another CEO who was also a graduate of our Leaders in Tech program. So, you know, we're leaders in tech, so all of our founders are in tech by definition. So he reached out to me on a Tuesday and he said to me, Carole, I have to tell you this. And I said, okay, what is it? He said, on Friday, we missed a major deadline, a software release that I knew was going to have some very negative consequences, impact our many of our users. And I spent the whole weekend just furious, at my team. How could they do this? How could they let this happen? And he said, and Monday mornings they have their all hands, like a lot of CEOs of tech companies. So he said, so I was, gearing up to just blast them all on, Monday morning and tell them how, worthless they were and how furious I was. He said, and then for some reason, I thought about everything that I learned from you with regard to anger. And I realized that what was under my anger was the fear that I was the only person who felt as strongly about how negative the consequences were going to be of this missed deadline. And it scared me. Like, oh my God, am I the only person who really cares this much? And so that Monday morning, instead of leading with blasting them all, he said, so I want to tell you a little story. And he said, I spent the whole weekend furious at you all. Then I remembered this thing that I learned. And actually, underneath the anger, I'm actually scared. And I didn't know whether or not I'm the only person who recognizes the consequences of this. And he said, I have never had a team of people rally so fast to fix a problem in all the years I've been in business.
Think this is such a powerful story. As a product marketing leader, I know all about launches and like missed launches. And the way you explained it, it resonated so well with me because that's what I would usually feel. I would be angry, but then I think like it's so universal. You're really scared that no one cares. You're scared that people do not care, and then they just went on with their lives while your business is on fire. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's such a powerful example.
Let's take a moment to talk about feedback. So once we finally ready to give feedback, before we created a huge crunch that we can't get through, how should you moderate how sincere you should be in your feedback and how much of information to disclose?
I want to unpack your question. There's several pieces to this. First of all, a core concept in the book is this concept of 15%, which is we all have our comfort zone. We don't think twice about what we say. We have our danger zone. In a million years, I'd never say that. But there's this zone in the middle, which is our learning zone. And we have to step outside our comfort zone in order to learn. So students used to say, but the minute I'm outside my comfort zone, how do I know I'm not in my danger zone? And we used to say, well, why don't you step 15% outside your comfort zone? So the 15% rule applies to both disclosure and feedback. And embedded in every piece of feedback is some disclosure. Because if I'm going to give you feedback effectively, I'm going to have to be very specific about the behavior you're engaging in and how it's making me feel. By the way, that's why the students call the class touchy-feely, because the emphasis on feelings and emotions, not because there's a lot of touching going on, okay? So the more specific you can be with and the more you stay away from attributions or imputed motives or interpretations of why the other person did what they did, the more you stick with, that in that meeting, you interrupted me 4 times when I started to say X, when I started to say Y, when I started to say Z. And I was increasingly frustrated, or I felt shut down, or I resented not being able to finish making my point. That's why you need the vocabulary of feelings. Most people don't even know what they're feeling. Instead, they say, I felt that you just wanted to dominate, which, by the way, does not have a single feeling word in it. And telling you that you're dominating is not going to make you more open to my feedback. So, so that's the formula is when you do X, I feel Y or I felt Y. And then you've got to include, and I'm telling you this because. What's your intent? I'm telling you this because we're going to be in a lot of meetings together going forward. And if I don't say something now, I'm going to get more and more irritated every time you do that. And I'm going to have a harder and harder time listening to you. And I don't want that to be the outcome. Or you started the meeting, if this is the boss, you started the meeting by saying you want to hear from everybody. Well, I'm less and less inclined to offer up my opinion when I never get to finish my point. And that's why I'm telling you. Now you're giving the other person a choice, but you're giving them data with which to make an informed choice. Do you want to continue behaving the way you're behaving and get the same result? Or do you want a different result?
I know you believe that feedback is a breakfast for champions.
That's Joel Peterson. We borrowed that from Joel Peterson.
Yeah. But I remember I first learned about this phrase from your book.
Yeah.
And so how can leaders create this feedback-rich culture on their teams?
Well, the first thing they can do is they can model it. But there is, David and I co-authored a paper called Building a Feedback-Rich Organization. In that paper, we talk about, first, as a leader, you have to create a norm that says, this is what we're going to be about. We're going to be about being honest with each other. Because if we care about each other, I'm not going to let you do something that's just hurting you more and more and not tell you. So first, you have to set a norm. And by the way, you have to set a norm that's not one that is not of blame. It's one of learning. Then you have to arm people with the skills. The reason feedback so often goes sideways is that most people don't know how to do it well. They think they're giving feedback. But what they're doing is they're making attribution or imputing a motive. They're not being behaviorally specific. They're making up why the other person's doing what they're doing. They think they're giving feedback, but it's not feedback. And so unless people learn to be more skilled, and by the way, if you learn the skill, not only can you be better at giving it, you can be better at receiving it. You can recognize when somebody's over the net, and you can say, okay, you just told me that, I don't care. And, you know, obviously I've behaved in a way that leads you to conclude that I don't care. Could you help me understand what it is that I'm doing that has led you to that conclusion? You push them back over to their side of the net. I hear that you're irritated with me. I hear you're disappointed. I hear that you can try to, or you can say, it sounds like you're feeling this way. Do I have that right? The other mistake a lot of people make when it comes to feedback is they think it's just bleh. Let me just tell you everything you're doing wrong, and then you go fix it. So, feedback without inquiry is incomplete. So, can you help me understand what's going on for you? That's the seventh time you've shown up to the meeting late. And, I feel frustrated by that because you've also asked us to wait to start. And I'm telling you this because I don't want my frustration to continue growing. And is there something going on that's making it too hard for you to get here? This is a real story. One of the guys who worked for me, is there something going on that's making it hard for you to be here at the time that we start? And that's when he said, well, yeah, we got a lot of stuff going on at home, and I'm the one that's having to drop the kids off at school now, and I can't drop them off early, and I said, well, then let's start the meeting half an hour later. The purpose of constructive feedback is to move into a problem-solving conversation. It's not to change somebody else. The minute you set out to have that be your goal, you're going to be disappointed. But if I can be behaviorally specific and we can agree on, a behavior that will work better for me, but it'll also work for you, then we're going to have an easier time in that particular situation.
I mean, like, feedback without inquiry is incomplete. It's such a powerful thought. I just keep saying it in my head. Like, it's completely different lens for feedback.
Yeah.
And I think
and the other reason inquiry is important in feedback is that if the purpose of your feedback is to move into problem solving and is to influence someone else, people change for their own reasons, not yours. So the more inquiry you engage in, the more you'll learn about what matters to them. And the more you can speak to that as part of the problem-solving conversation.
That sounds really powerful, the idea of turning to the problem-solving mode as a main goal of the feedback, because I think we usually just stop after giving feedback and receiving. And then people who receive the feedback trying to digest this somehow and rarely learn. And people who give this feedback feel such a liberation that they
froze, Yana.
Have done their job. But nothing, it doesn't move a needle usually.
Right. And sometimes it goes in the wrong direction.
Right.
If you've done it poorly, then they're even less open to talking about it with you.
Carole, as we are wrapping up, that was such a powerful conversation on which we're going to reflect, I think, a lot of time. If listeners take away one key lessons or piece of advice from you, from our discussion today, especially in terms of applying those wisdoms that you shared with us today, what would that be that you want to share as a last point?
Well, in the immortal words of Nike, just do it. You're not going to learn any of this by reading about it in a book or by listening to me or listening to a podcast or watching a video. You're going to learn this by actually engaging with another person and learning from your own experience what moved the needle. And the more people you engage with intentionally with some knowledge of what you want to try, so the book or the podcast or the videos, they're useful for that. But that's that's the prerequisite before you're going to learn anything. Then you've actually got to go do something with it. And most people where they stop short of the doing because they're afraid. They're afraid of, there's a reason they haven't been doing it all along, right? They've got mental models they're going to need to test. So don't start with the most difficult person in your life. Don't start with the person that you feel most distant from. Don't start with the person who's been aggravating you for 20 years and expect a change. Start with somebody that, might be a little easier. Get your sea legs, as we say, and then, move to the next more challenging person. And don't set yourself up for failure.
Carole has left us with a practical exercise. Visit connectandrelate.com to download the Connect assessment. This tool helps you identify your strengths and areas for growth in building strong, robust relationships. Consider sending it to a family member, a good friend, or a colleague to compare their view of you with your own.
We learned so much from Carole today. First, exceptional relationships aren't about constant perfection. They're built on being known, trusted, and investing in each other's growth.
Anger often masks fear or hurt. Leaders who disclose these underlying emotions can rally their teams more effectively than just expressing anger.
Effective feedback is specific, focused on behavior, and opens the door to problem solving together. And here is some exciting news. We're giving away a signed copy of Carole's book to one lucky listener.
That's right. To have a chance to win, support us on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/masterytalks to join our community and get access to this special giveaway and other exclusive perks.
Don't miss out on future episodes and giveaways. Subscribe to Mastery Talks on your favorite podcast app to stay up to date.
We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your questions in comments or email us at team@masterytalks.com. Tell us about your experiences with the Connect assessment or any relationship insights you've gained while listening to this episode.
Until next time, keep moving the relationships that matter to you further on the continuum. Thanks for tuning in.